Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. How's everyone feeling? Ooh, yay, so exciting. This conference is my first time here. It is phenomenal. Met a lot of great people here, made some friends, learned a lot. So I hope you have too, and you're really enjoying the conference so far. So we are from Crisis Text Line, as Daniel mentioned, and before we dive into our presentation, I kind of want to give this warning for all of you. We are going to be talking about mental health and some really challenging situations and issues with mental health. So there might be times where you might be triggered. So please practice self-care, take a break, walk out of the room. You're not going to offend anyone. I just wanted to let all of you know as we dive into the presentation. So we are in the middle of this massive mental health crisis, right? So much so that it's growing globally as well as in our country. So much so also that the suicide is the second most reason of all the deaths in our country, right? And this is second most reason, especially for the age group 25 and under. And that's really sad and disheartening to hear that. But that's not the bigger problem. The bigger problem is we don't have enough mental health professionals in this country and even globally to be able to provide that support and care that all of these people need, right? From the statistics, about 55% of people who have mental health illness of some sorts do not receive treatment. And that's because there's this huge scale gap that we have between the professionals that are available and then the people that need help, right? If anything, we need more human-to-human connection to be able to help people that are having some of these really hard problems with their mental health. It could range from things like depression, anxiety, all the way to, feeling suicidal and also homicidal, where you're hurting yourself or others. So thank you, Daniel, for introducing us. I just want to share a very quick personal story. So I volunteered as a crisis counselor for a suicide hotline for about 2 years and went through lots of training, about 6 months of training to be able to do that. And then one day, that call came that I was dreading from the moment I made that decision that I wanted to give back to the community, help in any way that I can. And on the other end of that call was a woman who had the means to hurt herself and a plan laid out and ready to take action. And I was using a very antiquated software at that time. This was about 8 years ago. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I thought all that training is going to prepare me for that day and that moment, and it really didn't. So I was in distress myself, trying to scramble, trying to figure out what telephone numbers I should get access to, who should I call, and figuring out all the protocols, right? Actually implementing those protocols, which I, in theory, had learned and memorized. It took me about 10 minutes to send help to this woman on the other end of the call. And those were the longest 10 minutes of my life. It felt like 10 days have passed and I'm not able to help her. So this is exactly why I joined Crisis Text Line, because I want to be part of the solution. I want to provide the help that people need in the time that they need it. With that, I also want to kind of hand over to Mateo, and so he can share why he works at Crisis Text Line.
So I don't have such a personal story as Maddie has, but basically, as Daniel was saying, I started my career doing research in particle physics and cosmology, and right out after the PhD, I decided to move to the industry, and one of the reasons why was that the connection of my work to the real world and the impact that I was having was really, really difficult to see for the work that I was doing. So I decided to switch to the industry and ultimately landed at CTL, which is not only a place where we have very interesting technical challenges and data challenges, but has also a very clear connection to the impact that we have for our users, right? Which is something that it's what I'm looking for.
So I just want to tell a little bit about our organization. We are a nonprofit. We are in the business of helping people and prevent suicide. Anyone who's having any kind of mental health distress can reach out to us. We have various mechanisms, text, chat, and whatnot. We've been doing this for a decade now in helping people with their crisis. The two cornerstones of our service is confidentiality and privacy. This is very, very important to us because this is why people trust us in reaching out to us, that we are there for them and we're not going to be sharing their information in any way it's not intended to, right? We believe to be able to support people in crisis, you really need that human-to-human connection, and you need that empathy to help and actively listen to them, understand their problems, walk them through like different coping mechanisms, and so forth, right? This year, we're actually celebrating our 10-year anniversary. Super excited about that. We've been doing this for a while. Crisis Text Line saves lives. So far, we have saved 3.5 million lives over the last 10 years, right? So throughout this presentation, I really want to encourage you to actively think how you can help us save more lives. That's what we're here for. So a little bit about our platform. Behind every single conversation, there's a person who is in crisis. There's a person who is having the most difficult times of their life that are reaching out to us. And on the other end of that conversation is a person like me who's volunteering, who wants to help the person on the other side of the line, and who wants to provide them the support that they need in the right way, right? We call them crisis counselors. These counselors, I went through the same training. We train about 30 hours or so. A lot of material to learn, a lot of coping mechanisms to learn. How do you actively listen to these people? So we go through a lot of training. And then we also have support. So we have clinically trained staff that are part of Crisis Text Line that are helping you as a volunteer in the moment while you're supporting and responding to these crises. They're coaching you in the moment and offline. And they're also, in some cases, when conversations like escalate, right? They start with depression, and then it really escalates where they want to hurt themselves. And that's where the clinically trained people step in and really take those conversations and help those people. So that's kind of like how our overall model works. But this is how our volunteers feel. This is how I felt, is I don't feel prepared. Yes, I've done all this training. Yes, I've read all the notes and gone through all these quizzes, but I still don't feel prepared. When I got that call, I was super scared. And almost 30% of our volunteers are in that exact same boat that I was, even after going through that training. Now, this doesn't really help the problem that we started with, right? That scale gap that we have, where not enough professionals. We want to empower and enable people to really step in and provide crisis support for people in need, right? If 30% of people are just like not feeling ready to have those really tough conversations. So, what do we do? So we went back to the drawing board. We're like, okay, so clearly our training is not equipping and providing enough information for our crisis counselors. So we brainstormed with our clinical team, and what we always kind of came back to, there was many ideas. One idea we came back to often was role play, right? A proven way where in many different industries of training and coaching has been proven to be very effective. So we said, okay, let's role play. Maybe we can get like a group of people that can do like this one-on-one role play and so forth, and teach these crisis counselors the right way of responding, what's effective, so that they can build confidence and have less anxiety when those calls come in, right? Now, we train about 700 new volunteers every month. So that is definitely not an option for us. That's going to be not cost effective, a scheduling nightmare. Where are we going to find people to even train these many people, right? And we have about 70,000 volunteers on our roster for the last 10 years, right? They keep coming back, and we offer like refresher trainings for them every year and so forth. So that was not an option for us. So we said, okay, how can we leverage technology and AI and data to really scale this in a way that's effective, both from a cost perspective, operationally, but then is also providing the right level of support and training. So that's kind of the genesis of our using large language models to be able to train our volunteers and make them super effective, give them the confidence that they need, and ultimately support people in crisis. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Mateo, who's going to dive into tech, which is what all of you are here for.
Thank you, Maddie. Okay, so now I will provide some details around how we built these scenario simulations, which of course are built on top of LLMs, and what are the decisions that we made to ultimately basically fine-tune a large language model so that it behaved as a texter, right? So what we did is that we basically fed through the OpenAI API an LLM. We fed prompts that were previous messages of a conversation, and then completions that were texter messages, right? And by doing so, we basically fine-tuned the model to the task of behaving as a texter would, okay? Before I go into the details of how we sort of did the data selection approach and everything, I want to give a quick piece of context on the service that we provide and how conversations go. So basically, the service that we provide for our texters, as they come into our platform in their darkest moments and in emotionally very difficult situations, we work with them and collaborate with them to bring them from that hot moment to a calm and safe place, okay? And the important thing is that these conversations, they tend to have a specific structure. There is a structure that these conversations need to have so that we can bring these people to a better situation, okay? We first build rapport with them, then we explore the situation, we also identify the goal, and ultimately we discover next steps and end the conversation as we feel that the texter is safe and in a better place, okay? Very important is that during the exploring phase, we do something that is an explicit assessment of the risk of suicide of the texter, okay? So basically what we do is that we ask explicitly the texter whether it's having thoughts of suicide or not, and if we get a positive answer, we ask around whether they have a plan or not. And if we get a positive answer, we ask about the means, whether they have means available to follow the plan. And ultimately, if we get positive answers to all of that, we ask about the time frame. Are they going to commit suicide within the next 24 to 48 hours, right? And ultimately, if we get positive answers to all of these questions, that means that the person is in imminent risk of suicide, and we need to flag the conversation for a supervisor to oversee, okay? So as you can imagine, the higher up in the ladder, the riskier the conversation is for the texter, and the more difficult it is to handle for a volunteer, right? You can imagine that this is not only complex for the texter, but also for a volunteer who's there working with the texter to keep them safe. So basically, that is sort of to give you an understanding that there is some structure to these conversations that we want our volunteers to be exposed to, okay, and to train on. And ultimately, if we think of this as a product, we need to understand that what we're trying to build are simulations that we can use to train volunteers and to make them feel confident and make them feel empowered to have these very difficult conversations, right? So if we're building a simulation that trains a volunteer to work on a specific part of the conversation, for instance, on the ladder up risk assessment, we need that to be predictable, okay? We need the simulation to always be the same scenario. So basically, the simulation should reproduce a specific persona and a scenario every time, okay? And ultimately, that has implications to what is the data selection approach that we take, right? We have this huge data set that we gather throughout the years of real conversations that are anonymized, But also we have this possibility that is enabled by the fact that LLMs can be fine-tuned with relatively few examples. That is that we can build manually a small synthetic data set that is narrow in the distribution of topics and risk levels, right? And we decided to take that route, not only because it's more convenient for model building, but also because it is synthetic data. So we're not using real data to build these models and to build these simulations. And we consider that that is free, or at least is better from an ethical perspective, which is something that is very important to us. So we collaborated with subject matter experts to build this data set, which was basically a set of role plays for every scenario that we built. Okay? When I'm talking here about a scenario, what I mean is that a model that for the full length of a conversation behaves as a specific texted persona. Okay? So basically, the subject matter experts that help us build the role plays in this case were our clinical team, okay? Our clinical staff members. So we collaborated with them to build 50 role plays for each of the scenarios that we have built so far that are full conversations. And we've built two scenarios. One that is called Olivia, is a texter that has thoughts of suicide but no plan, so it's a medium risk conversation. And then Kit, which is a high risk conversation, meaning that when doing the ladder up risk assessment, that person is in imminent risk of suicide. Okay, so we get positive answers to every question. And what's interesting here is that what we want to do is that we want to expose volunteers to the same structure of conversation every time, or skeleton of conversation every time, but we want the conversation, like, as I run the simulation several times, I want that to feel sort of different every time, okay? And we do that by allowing some variance in the role plays. So the structure is fixed, meaning that the stage in the ladder up risk assessment is fixed, the name is fixed, maybe other aspects of the demographics are fixed, but maybe the reason why they are in that situation, the texter is in that situation, the reason why they reached out, other aspects of the demographics, those might change from role play to role play. And with that, what we get is that we get sort of this experience that every conversation is sort of similar but different every time. And it doesn't feel like a decision tree, the simulation, the role play, okay? So basically, we took these role plays that the clinical team built with us, and we fed those to 3 of the LLMs that are available for fine-tuning through the OpenAI API, okay? So the most massive one, and then the large one and the medium one. And from that, we got 6 models. So basically, the 2 scenarios per model, okay? And now we need to go into model selection. The interesting thing here is that this use case is not a classification problem, for instance, where I do have a quantitative measure of success that is easily calculated, okay? This is a conversation-based scenario, so ultimately model selection and QA is a qualitative exercise. And basically what we need to do is that we need to generate a distribution of examples and manually check that the model is behaving as expected, right? And what I mean by generating a distribution of examples is literally having conversations with the role plays and understanding whether they are behaving as expected. Okay? So basically, we need to check that manually, that the models align with the persona and issues described in the role plays. We need to check that they don't run into logical inconsistencies. And actually, the rate of logical inconsistencies for these models is less than 6% for all of them. And for Olivia, which is, for Da Vinci, sorry, which is the massive one, it's close to 0. We also need to check that the models enable several conversation paths. And this is what I was just mentioning, right? As I run the simulation several times, I want every conversation to feel a bit different, to feel different. The same structure, but with differences. And for that, the smallest model was repeating itself too much, so it wouldn't be useful in production. And ultimately, we also need to check that they are within pricing projections, right? And Da Vinci, I don't know if you've seen the prices of the API for Da Vinci, but it's pretty expensive. Curie is 10 times cheaper, so we decided to keep Curie for our product implementation. Just a few words on the product implementation. Basically, we want to do a gradual rollout. It's very important in this use case to generate a strong feedback loop with our users. I mean, if you think about it, this is like a a tiny version of reinforcement human feedback learning, right? So what we want to do is do workshops with selected crisis counselors, volunteer crisis counselors, and work with our coaching and learning teams to understand who those people would be and who would be interested in going through these simulations and gather feedback from them. But ultimately, the North Star for this is sort of what Maddie already hinted, right? We want texters to be on the platform and be able to take simulations in a self-served manner. So that, for instance, if they want to train on a specific scenario that they know can happen in real life and they do not feel prepared enough or they are afraid to take it, they could take it. For instance, one thing that can happen in our platform and is something that triggers a lot our volunteers is that conversations from an overdose in progress can happen. So we might want to model an overdose in progress so that people, even if they were going through simulations, feel that they've gone through that scenario several times as the real life conversation comes, okay? So just have a quick, three quick things around how to make sure that this product implementation is successful. Of course, we need a super strong feedback loop with users in this case because of the nature of the use case. As we implement this into a product, we also need to introduce product guardrails, right? So for instance, very naively, you can think that as the API responds, we might want to introduce a delay so that it really feels that someone is texting back, okay? Also, we might want to do several API calls. If any of the API calls to the model fails or gives an answer that is too short, we might select or have fallback options. And ultimately, we need a robust collaboration with stakeholders because this is something that we build together with them, okay? And now what I will do is that I will show a quick few demo videos that will go through the ladder up risk assessment for both scenarios, okay? In the first case for Olivia, and then for Kit, which is the high risk one. As you can see, like this is the UI that we've built. In here, I enter what is called the conversation prompt. So basically the context that I give the model to start predicting. And then in here, I select the model, and I can start the conversation, okay? Should I maybe make it larger, or does everyone see it correctly? Yeah, of course. I don't think I can, I'm sorry. I don't. Sorry, so basically what I'm. Maybe? Yeah, sure. So, got it. So basically what I'm doing here is that I've already started the conversation with this texter, okay? And I'm already in what we call the risk assessment part. So as I start the risk assessment phase, I ask explicitly around whether the texter is having thoughts of suicide or not, okay? And the texter, which in this case is the model that we built, confirms that they're having thoughts of suicide. So now I need to ask about whether they have the plan to do it, okay? Oh, sorry. Now I ask about the plan, and as you can see, we already introduced that delay. And the texter, Olivia in this case, doesn't have a plan to commit suicide. So the ladder up risk assessment ends here. And now I can go to continuing the exploring phase of the conversation or doing brainstorm on next steps with the texter. But what's important here is that I could have a conversation with this same model with another context, and it would be different, okay? But what wouldn't be different is the fact that the texter has thoughts of suicide but no plan, okay? So that's fixed. And now I'm asking about, I'm doing more exploration, which is something that one should be doing. And the texter had just said that they feel really nervous, they have a lot of anxiety, they can calm down, okay? So now I go into the second use case, which is Kit, which is the high risk use case. So I will do the same exercise. I'm introducing context such that I can go directly into the ladder up risk assessment. But what's important here is that this context, I could start the conversation from the top, from the very beginning, from the first message of the texter, right? I'm just introducing this context to show the ladder up risk assessment for demo purposes, but I could have like the full conversation with the model. As you can see, in this case, the texter has already mentioned thoughts of suicide at the beginning of the conversation, so we go ahead and ask explicitly around the plan. And they did confirm that they have a plan, so we need to ask about the means. As you can see, this is a model, this is a simulation, but this, I hope that the seriousness of this conversation, even if it's a model, gives you a perspective or an understanding of why we want to help our volunteers to feel more confident and feel empowered to take, again, these very, very difficult conversations with people that are on their darkest times, okay? So the texter has confirmed that they have thoughts of suicide. They have the means to commit suicide. And now we need to ask around the time frame, okay? And they just confirm that they are considering committing suicide in the next 24 hours. So this is a high-risk conversation that should go, that should be flagged for a supervisor to oversee, for a clinical staff member to oversee, okay? And now I go into what it's called safety planning, which is trying to work with the texter to keep them safe from suicide, okay? I hope that at least some of you can read it, but what I'm asking is whether the texter is willing to work with me in this case to stay safe from suicide for tonight, okay? And they said they can try, so we might continue the conversation in that point, okay? Again, these role plays have been built by our clinical staff, so it's vetted by subject matter experts, of course. And just before Maddie wraps up the presentation, I wanted to give a few lessons learned that we got from working in this use case that we not only consider that are very interesting and from like a technical perspective, but are also very generalizable, and we actually intend to apply those into our further work and next use cases that we intend to build, right? As you probably all know, these new abstraction layers like the OpenAI API, the Hugging Face libraries and models are basically democratizing generative AI. And now non-experts are able to enter the space and build solutions on top of state-of-the-art models, which is something that is very powerful. Also, the fine-tuning capabilities of LLMs enable use cases that are built on synthetic data, reducing dramatically data privacy concerns. We feel that's very, very powerful, and we actually think that most, if not all, of our use cases can build on synthetic data, which is something that it's very important. Also, for these cases that involve simulated conversation, model selection and QA is mostly a qualitative exercise, okay? And ultimately, and I guess that as a summary to maybe other lessons, is that as these technical challenges are abstracted away by these APIs and libraries, basically new product management and project management challenges surface, like interacting with the synthetic data generators, building the requirements, the feedback loop that you need to create with users, etc. And with that, I will leave it to Maddie to do a wrap-up of the presentation.
Thanks, Mateo. So that was pretty good. And Mateo, and I think there was one other data scientist that worked together. We had help from an advisor from OpenAI that really helped us navigate this really challenging problem. So we're very, very thankful and grateful for the community support that we have. So I do want to, before I kind of go into summary and what we're doing next, really wanted to talk about the three grounding principles on which the solution was kind of envisioned. The first one being that what we are doing here is really impacting people's lives very directly. We can't mess up. We have to get this right. If we don't, people will die. So we really need to ground ourselves in that this is not a science experiment, and some things could work and not. Because we are really telling our volunteers, these are the ways you can respond to crisis and you can help people in need and save them from hurting themselves, right? So that's number one. Number two, at the very core of our organization, the core value is privacy. We take that very seriously because that is how people trust us. That is why they reach out to us, and they have been reaching out to us for the last decade. We cannot compromise that. We cannot break their trust, which is also one of the biggest reasons that we chose to use synthetic data. We have data 10 years worth. We anonymize the data because we have PII in it, but we consciously made that choice not to use that. It took us longer because we had to now get subject matter experts, create these role plays, and thanks to the technology, we didn't have to create thousands of them. We created 50, and we built a model that was pretty effective. We have to do a lot more work, but that is one thing. And the last one, when people need help and they're in crisis, we are never going to replace and put a chatbot or AI there. There is always going to be another human at the end of that other line to be helping. We believe in that human-to-human connection. We think human connection and empathy and actively listening and really hand-holding people through these really difficult moments in time is super crucial and vital for us to really battle this global mental health challenge that we're seeing. So I just wanted to kind of talk about these three things. So another three things, what are super important. The first one being quality. Like Mateo talked about, we need to check, and we have to do this manually today. Check each and every conversation and each and every simulation and role play that we're going through. Is this meeting our needs? Are these effective? And creating that feedback loop, not only for the model, but a feedback loop also for the people that are responding, right? The messages that I have and what I'm responding with, are they effective? Are they great? Will they solve the problem for the texter and so forth? Second being cost. We are a nonprofit. We work on really tight budgets. We have to be cost conscious. Mateo talked about how we kind of looked at the value that we get from the model, the variance, as well as the amount of cost it's going to cost us. And that's how we kind of made some of those decisions. And the third being, how does this model now really is a part of this overall solution, right? Where does this fit in? When is this model ready for me to say like, yeah, I'm ready to launch the simulator for my 10,000 volunteers, right? How do I think about this? I think there's a lot more work that we have to do in those realms to be able to really figure out like what does success look like, right? When do we say like this model is actually solving the problem? Yes, we can look at metrics and say like how many volunteers, do surveys and so forth, but we really need to focus on the integration of this model into the overall solution. So that's kind of like a high-level summary. We do feel that we are in a very privileged situation, that we have the opportunity to kind of use technology and leverage that to be able to contribute back to the society for the greater good. So we do feel that. What's next? This is the exciting part. This is just the beginning. We want to do so much more. We're starting with the conversation simulations, which you all saw the demo of, but we also want to create some kind of indication and feedback for the crisis counselors, where they can really get in-time feedback as they are responding to this model that's telling them, hey, this is an effective message, thumbs up, you need to work on this. And then next, actually give them some suggestions. These are what effective responses would look like. So they are actually going through this ongoing coaching and getting better at like responding to crisis. That's some of the next things that we want to do. The risk assessment that Mateo talked about, it's fairly complicated, and to do that manually and to then, it's a big cognitive overload. So we're like also looking at mechanisms where can we use AI to analyze the conversation, the message content, and continuously like make an assessment, is this a low risk? Is this conversation escalating to a high risk? And make decisions around prioritizing those conversations or matching these texters to the right responders or the right clinical staff, right? So really looking at efficiencies there, where the overall goal being, can we get the people in crisis the right level of help at the right time? That is of the essence. And then we want to also overall figure out, how are these conversations, like kind of almost like post-analysis of our conversations, is how did we do? Where can we get better as an organization? Where can we get better as people who are part of this solution, and so forth. So we have a lot of exciting plans, and we need help. And there's various ways you can help us. A quick plug here, we are hiring machine learning and data engineers, and you can visit our website to see what other open roles we have. You can also become a crisis counselor or volunteer your time with us in being a thought partner in a solution or advising us for different ML type of things that we have on our plans. So there's many ways you can help us. And last but not the least, I talked about me being a volunteer, and I volunteer as a crisis counselor. So can you, and give back to the community. It's not only that you're helping these people in crisis, but you're yourself learning all these coping skills that are absolutely useful life skills for yourself, for your friends, for your family, and then you can be that person in your family that's helping everyone. And with that, I welcome you to join us in this battle against mental health that's happening globally, so we can fight this together. Thank you.